Many thanks to Belinda and to the rest of the speakers. We have a few minutes left, but we're very honoured that Justice Kirby has managed to join us. And before he dashes off to give the public oration, we would like to invite him to maybe give a few comments on either here or up here about this issue. So thank you.
Well, it's been a great pleasure and an education for me to be here at QUT today and to hear such stimulating papers relevant to the work that I have been doing over the last 2 years on the high-level panel of the Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon has left a number of important legacies, but the one I think he was most proud of was the move from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals. These were to be the objectives that the world community would set before itself to achieve by 2030. Some people scoff at these things, but if you set goals for humanity and if you get concentration of effort and cooperation in the international community, you can do a lot. If we just look at what was achieved in the period from about 2003 to date in the HIV epidemic, we can see the extraordinary development that led to about 18 million people on antiretrovirals now as a result of the cooperation of the international community for that exceptional challenge, and the provision of funding by PEPFAR, President's Emergency Fund, established by President George W. Bush, don't forget that, and the Global Fund, which was supported by the United States and other countries, but very substantially by the United States, under the George W. Bush administration and under the Obama administration that followed. And so these are not pipe dreams, or they're not entirely pipe dreams, but there's nothing wrong and we shouldn't be embarrassed about dreams, because it's out of dreams of our common humanity and of our shared concern about brothers and sisters in other countries of the world that we can develop global strategies which will make a difference. Now, this is not the time for a long lecture about the high-level panel, but the panel had some very distinguished members. I wouldn't say that my main concern in life has been health law, but it has been a concern over many decades, mostly in the field of HIV, and essentially one of the issues that was presented by the high-level panel was how we extrapolate from the experience of the particular disease, HIV, for the way in which we address other problems, including other problems of developing countries. And we've heard wonderful presentations today, sobering presentations, about the failure of the market system to respond to the needs of new conditions like Zika and Ebola, though Ebola's hardly new, but it's been around and nascent and became more potent in recent times, and how we learn from that experience and develop it into a new global strategy. So that was the overall objective. The two co-chairs of the high-level panel were very prudent former heads of state and government. The one who, I think it's fair to say, took the main running of the whole enterprise was Ruth Dreyfus. She was a politician from the Swiss Confederation, and she rose to be the first woman president of the Swiss Confederation, and she has had a long interest in international health law and what can be done to improve the response of the world community. very well motivated and very intelligent, an edge of progressivism, but she has been in charge of a very vibrant democracy that has lots of referenda and is a sort of very responsive type of political situation. She survived and she rose to the top job in the country. The other head was Festus Mogai, whom I'd met earlier on the UNDP Global Commission on HIV and the Law. He had been the president, head of government of Botswana. Botswana did better than most of the African countries quite early in the HIV epidemic, and that was because he was willing to take some risks and do unusual things in an African context in dealing with HIV. And the high-level panel, which had a lot of very important and interesting people on it, if I just had the time to speak to you today about the personalities, I'm sure everyone at this table would be very interested in these people, because they are the people who were really working at the cutting edge and had been trusted by Ban Ki-moon to push the system along. Celso Amorim was the former defence minister in the government of President Lula of Brazil, and if you're around UN meetings, you realise Brazil's a very special and tough country, and it does things for its people, even though it can upset great and powerful friends. And Amorim is a man who is quite willing to upset powerful economic interests in the protection of the people of Brazil. And he did that when the HIV epidemic came along, when there was a lot of bullying to try to prevent Brazil developing antiretroviral generic drugs. He persuaded President Lula to offer to the large pharmaceutical corporations which were objecting to what was doing 2 first-class air tickets to Brazil to see the pharmaceutical companies in Brazil, just to assure themselves that Brazil could develop the generics for the protection of the human health of their people, which happens to be a constitutional obligation in Brazil, and it was an obligation they were going to do. Amorim was the person who, at the time of the Doha Declaration, was locked in a room when they couldn't reach agreement at Doha with the chief delegate of the United States of America, who was the antagonist, and they couldn't get a formula. And Mr. Amorim and the American delegate were locked in a room until they got a formula. And they got a formula, and the formula is the Doha Declaration. And the Doha Declaration, as he insisted, was a way of ensuring the protection of human rights in a body, the World Trade Organization, which was a trading cartel, and that this was not to be trifled with, and it was an essential part of the scheme. But it was an essential part that had been, to some extent, undone by bullying and pressure imposed on developing countries to give away their flexibilities that had been assured by the Doha Declaration. And that upset Mr. Amorim no end. He wanted to get back to the principles of Doha and to ensure that they were upheld. Now, we don't have a lot of time, but I want to say the high-level panel essentially had to choose between 3 models. Model number 1 was a model which was urged upon us by Big Pharma and pharmaceutical interests. We had the top scientist of Johnson & Johnson, which to my surprise is actually the biggest international research pharmaceutical corporation. And also of GSK, the chief manager, Sir Andrew Whitty of the United Kingdom. They were Whitty was a member of the high-level panel, and the Johnson & Johnson chief scientist was a member of the technical advisory group, which I chaired. And not to oversimplify it, but to just put it in perspective, they essentially said, look, we're doing pretty well, we've had the most remarkable innovations, don't mess with it. A little bit of tweaking and so on would be a way to deal with it, and don't do anything that breaks down the rewards and pressure for innovation. Because look at where we've come in the last 30 years. And there was force in that submission. The other point of view was that advanced by Mr. Bermudez, also of Brazil, and by Sheba, a civil society activist from Thailand, who said essentially this is a broken, fractured model. It is simply not working. The market cannot deliver for the different markets that exist in our world, and unless we just write off poor and sick people, then we're not going to work it under the market model. We've got to essentially go back to the drawing boards and reach a new agreement that reconciles the good of intellectual property protection with the good of the right to health. And we're not doing that now, and that's what the high-level panel should do. And those two teams had strong supporters in the technical advisory group, in the submissions that we received, in the public hearings that we had, and in the members of the panel and the high-level group. The view that prevailed, and to which I adhered, was, as I look back on it, quite a modest one. It's a very modest proposal that the high-level panel put. Maybe too modest, but it's a modest proposal that essentially reminds people of TRIPS, of Doha, of the human rights protection of Doha, of the unacceptability of countries bullying others to give away their TRIPS flexibilities, of the need to protect the right of compulsory licences, encourage voluntary licences, and to establish an R&D fund growing out of the idea of the global fund against AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria. And that this is the way to secure innovation and at the same time to protect invention, much of which invention, as we saw in one of the slides, happens in universities and often happens simply because of the curiosity of a scientist. It's not motivated by money, it's motivated by curiosity. Like David Baltimore's research on chimpanzees in West Africa who had this strange retrovirus, and his research put us about 10 years ahead when HIV came along, the human immunodeficiency virus. Anyway, the modest package prevailed. That has still been greatly attacked by most of the developed countries. I was reading this morning, I was sent by one of the members of the high-level panel, Professor Fukuda Pa of Japan and the United States, the minutes of the executive board of the World Health Organization in the last couple of weeks, and the debates within them, and really there's a San Andreas fault around the world. It's between the European Union, Switzerland, Japan and the United States, and everyone else on the other side. The executive board did not want to put and did not put the high-level panel report on its agenda, but it did allow the matter to be debated under another agenda item. So that was a very typical United Nations solution. You didn't get a specific item, but you could discuss it, and they did discuss it, and you saw this deep divide between them. I go back there on the 8th of June, the 8th of March, for the purpose of a panel presentation to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. And our objective is going to be to try to put things on the agenda of the Human Rights Council, which had adopted this idea of a right to health being protected effectively in international law, including in the area of intellectual property. And so, I thank everyone who's made a contribution. I've noted what has been said. I'd be grateful if I can have the slides of the contributions. And if anybody feels, given what I've told you about how it's developed, where it is, where it's come from, and where it currently stands, if you have any thoughts at all, then I would invite you to send them to me. I don't go there until shortly before the 8th of March, and I will certainly feed them into my own thinking. I will be given 9 minutes there. I've seized more here, but I'll be given 9 minutes to talk to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, of the world, on this issue. And so it's not unimportant, and I'm thankful to you for the work you're doing. I'm thankful to the Centre for the work it does. I'm grateful to be invited back here to QUT, and this throws us together on what is definitely a great moral issue, but also a very practical issue for the health and human rights and benefits of humanity. Thank you.
So many thanks to Justice Kirby for those comments.